cool. Good morning. We'll get started in just a few minutes, waiting for any other folks to trickle on in. Good morning. For those who just joined, we'll start in just a couple of minutes, see if more folks are going to join us this morning. All right. Good morning, everyone. It's 10 right now. We'll just give it another few minutes, just to see if we get a couple more folks, and we'll get started in about 2 minutes. For those of you in the group, if you could either put your name and your organization in the chat if you feel comfortable doing so, or you could also rename yourself the three little dots in your box. You can update your name and add your organization if you feel comfortable. We'd just like to know where folks are joining us from today. Not a requirement, but something that we'd appreciate if you're up to it. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Some folks are still trickling in, but I think we'll have a little bit of a smaller group today. This is the second informational session that we've done. We did one about 2 weeks ago. So for those of you that are just joining us, if you feel comfortable, please put your name and the organization that you're with in the chat, just so we know where folks are coming from. It's not a requirement. It's totally up to you. But we'll go ahead and get started. So my name is Heather Miguel. I am the manager of the program projects unit here at the Employment Training Panel. My team does a lot with the apprenticeship program here at ETP. And so we wanted to host today an informational session about the apprenticeship contracts with ETP. I would ask if you're joining us, please mute yourself. If we get background noise, Alex, my colleague here, Alex, give a wave. She will be helping me with some of the logistics. She'll be helping with the chat and also with some of the question and answer. We would ask that you hold most of the questions until the end. We do have a fairly lengthy presentation, so if we save questions to the end, we can get through all the information that everyone will need. So again, thanks so much for joining us today. And just so you all know, this meeting is being recorded. All right, so we'll just go ahead and jump into it. So for those of you that are not familiar with ETP, I'd like to provide a brief overview of who we are and what we do. So ETP was established in 1982 by the California State Legislature and works to attract and retain businesses in California that are contributing to a healthy economy. We also want to help secure workers with high wage secure jobs. Our agency and our funding is governed by an 8-member panel. These are political appointees who make all the funding decisions for our program. They also help with some of the policy making that we do on our program side and offer input on the program. These appointees represent business, labor, and the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, or GOBIZ. ETP is funded by a special tax on California employers. This is called the Employment Training Tax. And a small portion of that tax is allocated to ETP, and that makes up our annual core budget every year. And the primary focus of our funding is to provide funding for incumbent workers who are receiving training. Incumbent workers are not the only folks that we train. We do train other populations, including those with barriers to employment and at-risk youth individuals, as well as apprenticeships, obviously. However, the bulk of our funding is for incumbent workers. One thing that's important to note for those of you that are not familiar with our agency, ETP does not actually provide training, but rather we allow our contractors to provide their own customized training, instructors, and training resources. ETP's purpose is to offer reimbursement for training expenses. So that being said, this is not a grant. We operate on performance-based contracts that we'll talk about later in the presentation. And contractors can expect that the bulk of the funding expenses will be paid to them at the end of their contract term. Because the model is set up to offset training costs, but we are never intended to replace or supplant a training budget for any of the programs or contractors that we work with. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, we operate on performance-based contracts. So these are some of the standard performance metrics that you'll see with ETP. So I do want to preface here that historically, ETP is a really good funding fit in this arena for well-established apprenticeship programs that have very strong partnerships with employers. Because the intent of our funding is to serve employers, that becomes really, really important, okay? And because we operate on performance-based contracts, one of our performance metrics is employment. So if these folks are not employed during or at the end of their program, meeting a specific wage, we will not pay for funding. So having those relationships with employers is super, super critical so that we know that the apprentices are working in jobs. So, ETP's performance metric operates under the metrics of training, retention, and wages. So that means that the first performance metric is that all trainees in a given contract must receive a minimum of 8 hours of training. Now, we know for apprenticeship programs, they're typically going to receive many, many more hours than that. But 8 is the bare minimum that trainees can receive in order for ETP to reimburse you for those training costs. The second metric is that all trainees must be retained in a full-time job. Again, this is reiterating the need for strong relationships to employers, as the intent is that all of the trainees are working. ETP's standard retention or job placement is 90 days full-time with one employer. We do have some alternative retention periods. So if you are training folks in an industry in which it's not customary to work 90 days full-time, we do have some alternative retention that we can offer to you. Important to note here is that full-time is considered 30 hours a week or more for the intent of ETP. So again, I really can't sort of focus on this enough, but the retention piece is super critical because if your apprentice is not placed in a job and retained 90 days full-time, we will not pay for any of the training that they've received. And then this leads us into the third performance metric, and that is what we call the post-retention wage. So this metric requires that all of the trainees meet minimum wages once job retention is completed. So the chart to your right will show you the wages, the required post-retention wage that we have for this program. So as you can see here, the standard minimum wage ranges between $22.66 all the way up to $30.90. The required wage is dependent on a number of factors, including the makeup of your apprentice program and its geographic location within the state. One thing I do want to note here is that up to $2.50 of the employer paid portion of health benefits, so this would include medical, vision, and dental only, may be used to supplement the ETP minimum wage. The other thing I want to mention here, these wages are not static. They change every calendar year. However, if you were to enter into a contract with ETP this year, these are the wages that would be written into your contract, and those are the wages you would be held to across the term of your contract. And ETP, as you can see on the first bullet point here, operates on 2-year contracts. All right. So the next slide is talking about the program eligibility. So the two most important factors here are that your apprenticeship program is approved with the state's Division of Apprenticeship Standards. That is our #1 requirement here. So we are aware of some apprenticeship programs that are approved by the Department of Labor, the Federal Department of Labor, but are not approved by the Division of Apprenticeship Standards, or DAS. You must have that DAS approval in order to contract with ETP. And again, reiterating, it's really important that we have those strong employer relationships. Now, when you should you choose to decide to submit an application with ETP, we also will collect some additional information on your apprenticeship program. We will ask that you send us your program standards that are approved with the Division of Apprenticeship Standards. We would also want to know your DAS file number that is associated with those standards. And if applicable, we would ask for a copy of the trust document. We typically see this with joint apprenticeship training committees or unilateral apprenticeship committees, as well as any collective bargaining agreements that may relate to your apprenticeship program, as well as any wage sheets that your apprentices the sheets that dictate the wages for apprentices if that is applicable to your program. So let's talk a little bit. We talked kind of more generally about the ETP model overall, but I do kind of want to hone in a little bit on the apprenticeship model that we have. So as I mentioned earlier, ETP is a pay-for-performance reimbursement model contract. So the manner in which we reimburse training costs is what we call a flat fee rate. So you'll see here that the eligible training populations under our apprenticeship program model are apprentices, pre-apprentices, and journey workers. So the flat fee rate for the apprentices and pre-apprentices is $16 an hour. This means that for every hour your apprentices or pre-apprentices are in training, we will pay you $16. That flat fee rate for journey workers is $23 per hour. So again, very important to understand that we reimburse on this flat fee hourly rate for the hours in which your trainees are in class. New this year, starting last fiscal year, ETP implemented a funding methodology for our apprenticeship program. This year, we are further refining this model. This year, what we will be doing is we will take into account the total funding demand for the apprenticeship program. This will factor in the number of all trainees requested by applicants, so the total bodies that people are asking us to pay for funding. We will also factor in the total allocated funding that we have for this year for this funding and come up with a cost per trainee amount. This cost per trainee amount will be used to determine total contract award values. We will apply this funding methodology equitably to all of our apprenticeship programs. We're still working through some of the specifics on this, but when we present all of our apprenticeship proposals to our employment training panel meeting in September, we will dive deeper into the methodology that we used this year. Support costs. So this is really important, included in your training costs. We also allow up to 8% support costs included in the contract for the apprenticeship program. These are costs that you can utilize in the recruitment of trainees if you're going to high schools or job fairs. This 8% support cost can be used to offset some of those recruitment and marketing costs within your contract. One thing I want to note with the support costs is that this is not paid in a lump sum to contractors. The support costs that we include in the contract are actually built in to the flat fee rate that you see in the first bullet. So really what that means is that the base flat fee rate for our apprenticeship contracts is $16 for apprentices. If we include the support costs, I think it shakes out to right around $17. So those support costs are actually built into the flat fee rate when reimbursement is requested from ETP. And as I have said on every other slide, employer relationships are really important here. And the reason I want to bring this up is that if you choose to apply and are awarded funding with ETP, you will actually need to collect the California Employer Account Number, or SEAN, as you can see that acronym, from those employers. This is actually information that is collected as a part of the administration, during the contract term. So this is very important. Folks need to typically have a very strong relationship with their employers to gain this information. And this is a requirement of the contract. So again, really just focusing in on those really strong employer relationships. All right, so let's talk through the training and curriculum. So most of the training and the curriculum topics that ETP will fund for training under this program are those related and supplemental instruction topics that are approved in your DAS standards. So that's the bulk of the training that ETP will reimburse for. I do want to mention that for the apprentices, we are only funding the classroom portion of their training. ETP for the apprentices does not fund any of those OJT hours that may be a requirement within your program. We do have a couple of other training methodologies that are allowable for journey workers, namely that would be computer-based training. So for the journey workers and pre-apprentices, we can allow a small portion of the training to be online self-paced, but the intent and the bulk of the training within any given training contracts curriculum should be classroom-based training. We also have required trainer to trainee ratios. So you'll see here in this bullet point that for apprentices, the trainer to trainee ratio is 1 to 25. So that's for every one trainer, there shall be no more than 25 apprentices in any given classroom-based training. And for pre-apprentices and journey workers, that trainer to trainee ratio is 1 to 20. ETP does require a fair amount of record keeping in order to substantiate training hours. And so our sort of standard methodology of training are essentially sign-in sheets that require some basic information that is required by ETP's regulations. I will talk about what that is in a couple of other slides, but I do want to note here that if you are utilizing a learning management system or an LMS system to track your training, ETP can approve that for record-keeping purposes within your contract. However, our staff will need to review that record-keeping system in order to ensure that it meets our ETP required regulations. When you submit your application for funding, you will be required to submit some documentation and ask some questions on your LMS. And once one of our staff review your application and begin working with you to develop a proposal for funding, they will really dig in and ask some more questions on that system in order to ensure it meets our regulations. And this sort of goes into our next bullet here, which is training, record keeping, monitoring, and administration. So as I mentioned before, ETP does require that all of the training is logged so that we can review those records during the term of the contract. We also do require a fair amount of administration as well. So you will need to enroll all of your apprentices and trainees into our contracting management system, which is on a Salesforce platform. And then you will also have check-ins from some of our staff. We call this contract monitoring, where they will check in on the performance of your contract, ensure that you are meeting your performance standards, as well as be available to you for any technical assistance or questions that you may have. And then finally, we do have a range of hours that are allowable within any given contract. So as I mentioned, one of our performance metrics is that there's a minimum of 8 hours of training provided for these apprentices. The maximum number of hours that ETP will reimburse for is 200 hours of training. So the range of hours is 8 to 200, meaning that your apprentices can receive any number of hours for reimbursement within ETP's contract between 8 and 200. If your apprentices do receive OSHA 10 training, we can also go up to 210 hours if they're also receiving that OSHA 10 training as well. So I want to, that's sort of an overview, a very general overview of the ETP process and then some information on our apprenticeship program more specifically. I do want to jump into quickly the development process. So this is more or less a general overview of the process that you will go through should you choose to submit an application for funding and if that is moved through our proposal development process. So the first step in the process is that you'll need to create not a profile, but you'll need to register in our Cal eForce system. This is our contract monitoring and development system that I mentioned earlier that is based on Salesforce. So on our website, and I'll walk you through this in just a minute, there is an option to register in CalEForce. Once you've registered in the CalEForce system, you will then submit the application for funding, which is also done via that platform. You will submit the application for funding. The applications for consideration this fiscal year are due June 9th. After the application is submitted, we do an internal eligibility check. This ensures that you are eligible to contract with ETP. Once that is completed by our staff, the project is then assigned to a specific office in our agency, and you are then assigned to a specific staff person or development analyst within those offices that will assist you and put the proposal for funding that will go to our panel together. So that is number 4, the development phase. As I mentioned, you will have an analyst assigned to you. They can answer additional questions that you may have throughout the application process. They will also review your application and work with you to obtain any additional information or clarify any of our program elements that might be misunderstood, and work to actually write the proposal for funding that goes to our panel, as I mentioned earlier. Once the proposal is complete and goes through an internal review, then the proposal will be headed to our 8-member panel for review and a determination on that funding award. As I mentioned earlier, ETP is anticipating that most of the apprenticeship program proposals will head to our September panel meeting. And if you are approved by the panel members, you enter into the contracting phase. Then you will receive a contract with ETP. Training can begin after panel approval. Then you will also be assigned a monitoring analyst once you've entered into the contract phase. So again, similar to the development, you will have a staff member that will help you during the term of your contract, answer questions you may have, help you with any technical assistance that you may need on our CalEForce system, or as it relates to our program guidelines, record keeping, those kinds of things. So I think it's really important. I think what sets ETP apart is that we offer that assistance to all of our contractors, and really will walk alongside you as you contract with our agency. All right, I'd really like to just briefly walk you through some of the elements you can expect should you apply for ETP funding. So the first is that registration that I mentioned. So this is a screenshot here of our ETP homepage. And if you click into the funding opportunities section that's highlighted in this yellow arrow, and then you click below that into the contract and alternative funds, you will see an opportunity to sign up and register in our CalEForce system. As I mentioned earlier, this is required. All of the applications are now submitted via our system. So you will need to set up the registration if you have not already. Once you set up the registration, you'll see the yellow button that says existing company login. You'll have that registration moving forward if you come forward for a new contract. The other thing I want to note on this screenshot here, so this blue button here is where you'll actually register in our system. I do want to note here that you'll see here is application templates and sample contracts. You can check in this section under our multiple employer contract and see a template of the application. Now, it's important to note that some of those questions are based on a waterfall, meaning that some questions you would not see in the live application that you might see in the template because they're based on their conditional responses. They're based on your answers. But if you wanted to take an overall review of the application prior to beginning that process, you can do so in that section here. We also have sample contracts here. So this is important if you want to take a look at some of our sample contracting language to get a feel for how our contracts look and what some of those contractual requirements are. Again, please bearing in mind here that some of those provisions will change depending upon the program that you apply for, specifically in this case, the apprenticeship program. But I think these are good resources if you're new to ETP and you want to get a sense for who we are. All right. The other thing that I wanted to mention here, I think that this is really important. So once you've completed your registration, on our homepage, in this section that says Cal eForce User Hub, we do have a user guide, which I've highlighted here with this yellow arrow. We do have user guides on submitting an application for funding. So this can help walk you through the process if you're a little unsure. We also have a system help desk. So if you're having any issues with the system, if you run into a glitch in your application, we have a help desk that can walk you through any of those issues as well. So I would strongly encourage you, if you're new to ETP, utilize those user guides as you begin to think about submitting an application with ETP. And when you, this is just a further refinement on those user guides. So when you click on the user guides, you will see applying for funds, multiple employer contract. Again, think that this is a useful tool if you are wanting to submit an application to ETP that can help walk you through that process step by step. All right, now we're going to jump into some things that you need to know and things that you should be prepared to answer when you are submitting an application to ETP. What I want to note here is this is not the entirety of the application. Again, I would strongly encourage you pull up some of those resources to get a sense for all of the questions that are asked in the application, but I'm going to highlight some of the important things that are really critical when you're submitting your application to ETP. First and foremost is at the beginning of the application, you'll be requested to tell ETP the type of contract that you'll be submitting to us. If you're new to us, this could be a kind of confusing. So I just want to lay out some important points here. First is that all of the apprenticeship funding for this fiscal year in this scenario of which we are discussing will come from our core funding. ETP currently has a couple of alternative funding, a couple of funding pots, I guess I should say, funding opportunities. Those have closed. So when you submit the application, you want to indicate that you are applying for core funding. It will ask you the type of entity that you are. You want to also indicate that you are coming in as a multiple employer contract, okay? That's also important. When you come in as a multiple employer contract, it will ask you the type of entity that you are. I know that many of you might not be a joint apprenticeship training committee or a unilateral apprenticeship committee, but if you are wanting to apply for our apprenticeship funding, please indicate this bullet specifically, the joint apprenticeship training committee or the unilateral apprenticeship committee. Again, recognizing that some of our apprentice partners are not those specific entities, but this indicates to the ETP staff that you are coming in as an apprenticeship program. We can refine that during the eligibility piece, and during the development, we will clarify the structure of your apprenticeship program as well as your organization. When you indicate that you are an apprenticeship program, along the lines of that second bullet, you will then be asked to upload any trust documents, collective bargaining agreement, master labor agreements that you may have. When you are prompted to upload those documents, if you don't have them, that's okay. But what we would ask that you upload at this point in time, including these documents, if you have them, are your DAS standards. We would really like to take a look at those. That will be really important. If you don't upload it at this point in time in the application, we will ask you for it after the fact. Then you'll be requested to upload or to fill in your contact information. We will ask for sort of a point of contact for the ETP program. This is the analyst will reach out to that person. They'll sort of be the go-to person as your proposal is being put together. If that person differs from your signatory, that's okay. You can indicate a different signatory at this point in time as well. Please note, ETP can't tell you who your signatory is. What we tell folks is that the person that is authorized to enter into a contract with the state of California is the person that you should put in the signatory. If the program point of contact and the signatory are the same, that's fine as well. And then we'll want to know some information. So please note that because ETP is, really, really primarily intended for companies, it will say company information, but we want to know about your organization, the year founded, the primary functions, products or services that you provide, and other general information about your organization. Important, please don't skip this. Please really put as much detail as you can. When our staff are putting the proposals for funding together, we want to be able to paint a picture of who your organization is to our panel members. So this does become really important. And then if you are working with a development subcontractor, this would be a third party who's assisting you with the proposal. You would need to indicate who that is in this section as well. All right, moving on. So need for training. This slide seems small, but I want to say that in the application, this really should be the narrative where you are including the most information. This really is the crux of both your application as well as the proposal that staff will put together for you. So we'll want to know the training need for your apprentices. Things like what's changing in the industry in which you are training that necessitates and requires this need for these apprentices to be trained. What does the employer need? What kind of skills are they needing? You really want to dig into this section here and really tell ETP why the training that you're doing is so critically important in the industries and for the employers that you are working for. We would also like, you'll see this sub-bullet here in this section, include examples of the work that your apprentices are doing when they're doing their on-the-job training. Tell us, if you're an IT apprenticeship program, tell us some of the coding projects that they're working on. Give us an idea of how they are actually using what they are learning in their program in the real world. This is really important. I must stress that our panel members really like to see how the training that they are receiving directly relates to what they're doing on the job. Again, as I mentioned before, please be thorough in this section. This is essentially one of the biggest components that our staff use to put your proposal together. And we're here to help you get funded by the panel, assuming you meet our eligibility criteria. So we want to make sure that we can put a really good proposal for funding together for you so that when you present a panel, you have a really good chance of being funded. Services and resources. So this, while this section does not lay out like the super critical training needs, it does become important. We do want to know how you're recruiting trainees, how you're recruiting employers, and how you will administer the project. How many staff are helping you with this? What are their titles? Because ETP is a performance-based contract and there is a fair amount of administrative work that occurs, we want to know that you have the right people in the right places in order to successfully execute the administration of this project. Further, in question 2 of this section, and the question says, provide local and regional occupational job outlook for training that will be provided. We will ask that you answer this question, but we would also ask that you include in this narrative, in this section as well, the total number of new apprentices you are serving this year, how many total new apprentices you've served each year since 2018, the percentage of growth due to new apprentices in the last 5 years, and your apprentice turnover rate in the last 5 years. These are specific questions that our panel members want to know, that we want to provide to them. If for some reason, let's say you're new to ETP, you forget to include this, our staff will reach out and ask these specific questions, but we're trying to preempt this. So in question 2, please provide this additional information in the services and resources section. This will allow us to provide this information to our panel members so that they have all the information they need to make sound decisions on your proposal. Moving along, we have a commitment to training and special categories program. So the commitment to training asks about training that's been provided in the past to some of the apprentices. The special categories would be where you definitely want to indicate that you're providing training to apprentices in this section as well. We would also encourage you, if you are targeting special populations in your apprenticeship program, please let us know who those are. If you're targeting, let's say, women are underserved in your industry and you're really looking to target women and get them into that industry, please include that information. If you're working with justice involved or formerly incarcerated individuals, if you're working with youth that might have been involved in gang-related activity in the past, please include that. One note here, ETP funds folks that are 18 and older. So if we're talking about any youth that you may serve, those folks need to be 18 or older for ETP funding. So please take that into account as well. Again, if you are serving folks in your community that need special help and attention, please highlight that. We definitely want to include that in our proposal and recognize the work that you are doing around folks to assist them in receiving really, really good employment. So that's important as well. You will be required to submit the occupations in your application as well. So these are going to be the applications as identified in your DAS standards. We also need to know the wage ranges for these folks. Again, ETP has minimum wages in the contract, so it's really important for us to understand what those wages are and ensure that the apprentices in your contract will meet the required minimum wage per the contract provisions that will be included once your proposal is approved. You'll also estimate the number of trainees. If you're a new program, I recommend coming in conservative. If you have folks that drop out of your program or for some reason are having a hard time meeting 90-day employment, you want to include a little bit of a buffer for those folks. And then you'll also need to include the estimated number of training hours. Remember, the maximum is 200. I would say for most of our apprentices, we see this number somewhere around 150 hours. Now, keeping in mind that we are doing a funding methodology this year, so we do want you to put in actual numbers here, but when your final contract is approved, this might be adjusted depending on the total award amount that we come up with based upon funding demand. This is the funding methodology I discussed earlier. And then you'll also be required in your training plan to include the occupations. So again, make sure that matches this occupations tab. And then the total hours of training. Again, remember, this is a pay for performance contract. So if trainees don't meet the wages or are not employed, ETP will not reimburse you for the training hours for that trainee. Not a grant. Pay for performance. And then curriculum. So I'm blending two things here. I hope this is not confusing, but first and foremost, you will be required to list all of the training topics that your apprentices will receive in training. This becomes very important. The curriculum topics that you put into your application will be an exhibit in your contract, and those will be the approved topics that you can train during the contract. So it becomes very important because when we're talking about record keeping and the administration, is that the curriculum topics that you put into your application are put into your contract. Once they're put into your contract, you have to tell us for every day and every hour of training what your trainees, what topic and type of training they were receiving. So the topics that are in your application curriculum should be those topics that you're going to, that your trainers are going to tell you, okay, John Smith received coding training today, because you will need to put that in your daily record keeping. When our staff go out, once your contract's approved, we actually look at your training records and look directly at the curriculum that was approved in your contract in order to match those things up together. So the topics that you put in your application should cover the gamut of the training topics that are in your apprenticeship program. I also put a screenshot here at the bottom. This is a sample roster that ETP has. Yours can look different, but the highlighted sections that you see on this are the minimum required information that we need for record keeping. So we'll have your contractor name, the contract number that you're assigned by ETP, the training location, training date, total hours of training, the type and the topic of training, and then we have the name of the trainees, as well as their signatures if you are using paper-based records. So again, we do require a lot of information, and I just wanted to provide a snapshot of what that is. All right, important dates. So I did talk through some of this already, but just want to lay this out. Our application window opened May 1st. Excuse me, so it's been open for about 2 weeks. It closes June 9th of 2023. So if you are interested in funding for next year, please submit your application by Friday, June 9th. We will perform eligibility determinations to ensure that you are eligible for funding with ETP. That will occur through the month of June. And then between end of June and August is the proposal development. So this is where our staff will reach out to you, ask any questions they have on your application, and develop your proposal for funding that will go to the panel. Between August and September is our internal review. And we expect that almost all of our apprenticeship projects will go to our September panel meeting for review by our panel members. The date of that meeting is September 29th. If approved by the panel, then the standard contract start date for these projects will be October 2nd. Just a quick note, on the contract execution and monitoring, I would be remiss if I did not, at a minimum, bring this up briefly. Once the project is approved by panel, within 2 weeks, you will receive a DocuSign link to sign the contract via DocuSign. There will also be what's called a group startup meeting. This is kind of a kickoff meeting where you will walk through the provisions of your contract, walk through the record keeping, and all of our administrative requirements at ETP. This typically happens about 3 weeks after panel approval. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there is periodic monitoring throughout the contract term. Our staff will review your record keeping. We like to observe one of your training sessions, be it in person or via Zoom or any other alternative platform. We also like to do brief trainee interviews to ensure that the training that you are providing is aligned with ETP's contract requirements. And as I mentioned earlier, I think one of the really amazing things about ETP is that you will have an analyst assigned to your contract that is available with any questions, concerns, or anything that may come up during your contract term. Alrighty, so Alex, if you could please link the ETP apprenticeship program email in the chat, as well as the CaliForce help, that would be great. The ETP apprenticeship program is available for any questions you may have specifically on our apprenticeship program. The ETP website, etp.ca.gov, is where you should go to look through some of those resources I mentioned earlier, as well as begin the CaliForce registration project, and that will link you to the application as well. The other thing I would like to mention is we do send out stakeholder notifications. So if you want to receive information about ETP, not specifically to the apprenticeship program, but all of our programming that's available, you can sign up for our stakeholder notifications. These come out periodically when there's things that we want to update the public about in regards to our programs. And then also is the CaliForce email address here that Alex has linked in the chat. So thank you so much for doing that, Alex. All right, so we'll jump into questions. So all of you have the ability to unmute yourselves and ask a question, or you can put it in the chat. So Alex, do we have some questions right now in the chat that we can talk through?
Yeah, we have three questions.
Okay.
One second. I'm trying to go back to allow everyone to unmute themselves. The first question was, will this PowerPoint be available to us
Uh,
after the meeting?
we are working to get this posted to the website. So I believe yes.
Right.
And
The
folks are also
second,
welcome to raise their hand and ask directly if they feel more comfortable doing that as well. It's up to you.
all right. The second question is, when you're speaking about apprentices, are you also speaking about pre-apprentices as well?
Pre-apprentices are also eligible under our ETP program. So they are their own trainee population, but yes, we can fund those. We reimburse the pre-apprentices at the same rate as our apprentices, which is $16 per hour.
All right. Is the deadline for training hours from this current FY or for next FY
So I
fiscal
think,
year?
yeah, so what this is a good question. And so this is not a, so essentially training starts under the contract once the project is approved. So the training contract start date is October 2nd of this year. So any training from October 2nd through the 2-year contract term is eligible for reimbursement under this model. Nothing before the start term of the contract is eligible for reimbursement. Chanel, I hope that answers your question.
All right. New hire trainees are unemployed at the start of ETP funded training and are receiving unemployment insurance benefits at the time of hire or have exhausted their benefits within the previous 24-month period. Workers who have received layoff notices from their employer are eligible for these training projects.
So this, we do have what are called new hire training projects. This specifically is relating to the apprenticeship program. So we are, the new hire projects are different. They have some different program nuances. So this is specifically for apprentices. If you have a new hire who is a registered apprentice with DAS, then yes, you know, those folks would be eligible, but the new hire projects are a little bit different. So we're speaking specifically to the pre-apprentices, apprentices, and journey workers here. And then Monique's asking if the recording will be available. I believe so. We'll work to try and get that on our website as well. Oh, Lori's asking about the new hire trainees. So, Lori, this again is specifically for the apprentices. So that requirement is not a requirement for the trainees in these projects. And then I see that you're asking about the funding methodology. Yeah, I understand the confusion. This is a good question. So the funding methodology will be utilized to come up with the max funding award amount. So we're using the demand that we receive as well as the total funding allocated for this fiscal year to come up with a max award amount for all of the programs. This will be applied to all of the apprenticeship programs that apply for this fiscal year. However, the proposals will then be created according to the max funding award amount. So let's say your project is $250,000. Our staff will get the funding as close as possible to that number, but the flat fee rates still stand. So you'll still be reimbursed 16 or 23, depending on the makeup of your contract and whether it's apprentices or journey workers. The funding methodology is to determine the contract award amounts. Glad that helped, Larry. And again, if you have specific questions, maybe on like the makeup of your program that you don't want to ask maybe in a public forum, you're welcome to submit them to the ETP apprenticeship program. I try to get back to folks as quickly as possible on that. So that's also eligible to you. I see Tariq has a question. Will contractors be eligible to draw down ETP apprentice funding in addition to the DAS AIF funding? Yes, they will. I believe ETP's apprenticeship program, our reimbursement rate is reduced from the standard 23 rate to $16 per hour. This accounts for any RSI funding and now the AIF funding that your program may be receiving from other funding sources. Thanks for that question, Tariq. So folks are, of course, welcome to stay and ask any questions that they may have. This concludes my portion of the presentation. I'll stick around for 10 minutes or as long as folks need to answer any additional questions that you all may have. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here today. And Alex, thank you for your help. Lori, so payout can be at the end of the contract. There are some benchmarks by which you can receive funding. We call them progress payments throughout the term of the contract. We do consider those cash advances until we're able to verify that you've met the performance for each of the trainees in your contract. So I would say that many of our apprenticeship programs wait until the end of the contract to ensure that they've earned all of the money that we pay them. We try to avoid getting into any overpayment situations, but there are some benchmarks by which you can receive some funding prior to the end of your contract. So I hope that helps. We do have some safeguards built into those progress payments. Yeah, you're welcome, Lori.
I had a clarifying question. How would we know if we qualify for an apprenticeship program or other like core funding opportunities?
Yeah, sure. So it depends on a number of factors, including like the makeup of the trainees you're serving, as well as the makeup of your organization. So for our core program funded funding, that's confusing, excuse me, but there are certain benchmarks that you have to meet. So it sort of depends on the makeup of your organization and specifically what you are applying for. What I will say as well is that some of our alternative funding has some like exceptions to that as well. So it just depends on how you're set up and kind of what you want to apply for. As far as the apprentice program funding, we're really looking at, the biggest thing for us is how, if you are approved, if your program is approved with the Division of Apprenticeship Standards.
Okay. And the application is for both core or apprenticeship by June 9th?
Yeah, so right now, the way our program is set up is that you can only apply for one core funded project per year. So you couldn't also come in for an apprenticeship program and a core funded project in this fiscal year. So what I'm thinking we could do, Chanel, is maybe connect you with our economic development unit who could walk you through the different types of programmings that we have. It might be more advantageous for you to come in for a standard contract as opposed to an apprenticeship contract, depending on how you're set up and sort of what you all do. So right now it's one or the other, but we could certainly connect you with some resources to maybe think through what might make the most sense for your organization.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Chanel, if you could do, you could even private chat it to myself or Zoom 8Ops. Alex is our host right now, and we'll connect you with our economic development unit, get your email over to them to get you some more information.
Perfect. Thanks again.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Hello, I have a quick question.
Sure.
I was busy at the beginning of the meeting, so is there any way I can get a recording of this meeting that we had?
Yeah, we'll work to post this to our website. So I would keep an eye out there, and we'll have it posted.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Alrighty, well, this concludes this informational session. I hope that you found this useful. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And yeah, I hope you were able to get some of those resources if you, you know, are interested in applying for ETP funds. So have a great day, and thanks again.